Scaling a business isn't all glossy headlines and overnight success. It's messy, it's tough, and it's full of lessons that no one warned you about. I'm Nikki Jupp, the founder of Talent Gateway, and I've helped over 100 scale-ups build the right teams, enabling them to grow with confidence. This is Scaling Stories Unfiltered, where founders, CEOs, and scale-up leaders share what really happens behind the scenes. No fluff, no filter, just honest conversations to help you scale smarter. So let's get into it.
I do remember actually the first time we got great client feedback on a project we delivered that I had absolutely no involvement in at all, no visibility. I hadn't been involved in any conversations. I hadn't seen any of the work that was going out.
Yeah.
And I remember getting a massive buzz from that about the fact of, hey, we've really built something here that actually we've created. We've got these people that we brought in. We've created the right environment that actually this is happening, and I'm not directing it. I'm not involved at all.
Today, I'm joined by someone who knows scaling inside out, from co-founding and scaling OneGTM to a successful acquisition, to advising some of the world's leading B2B tech brands. Phil Brown has spent decades helping businesses build smarter go-to-market strategies and high-performing teams. He's worked with companies like AWS, Cisco, Lenovo, and Vodafone, and now shares his experience as a board advisor, investor, and consultant. In this conversation, I'll dig deep into the realities of scaling with Phil, what works, what doesn't, and the key lessons founders need to know to avoid costly mistakes. Phil, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Nikki.
If we could kick off, please, could you briefly share your journey and what led you from the corporate world into entrepreneurship?
Sure. I started off my career in the corporate world. So I spent the first 10, 11 years of my career working in large enterprises. Started off in sales, new business sales, corporate account management, sales management, and then made the unconventional move perhaps to move into marketing, because that was an area that fascinated me, and then had marketing and strategy roles. And my career was going well, moving up the organization and all of those things, but knew something was missing, wasn't particularly enjoying the environment I was working in, but didn't quite know what else I wanted. And then I was fortunate enough to have an experience which ended up being quite transformational for me, which is I got the opportunity to lead a team, lead a project, which was to set up a .com business for Cable and Wireless, who I was working with at the time.
Okay.
This is around the turn of the century, when the .com boom was in full effect. Every organization had to have a .com strategy, had to have an internet strategy, unless you could go on an earnings call and talk about what you were doing to be an internet business. Then the analysts disapproved, a bit like AI.
Yeah.
So I got this opportunity to lead a team as part of this initiative. And what was really exciting about that for me was that we got the opportunity to do it as a startup. So outside the normal organization, went and worked out of separate offices. We were a team of about 20 people with a very clear focus about get this thing up and running in the shortest possible time.
Yeah.
And don't get bogged down by all the normal corporate treacle that you often have to wade through. And I loved that experience. I found the whole environment, the very clear focus we had, the energy of working in that sort of startup mode, the daily calls, the weekly sprints. I loved that experience. That made me, to an extent, realize what I hadn't been enjoying about working in a large corporate. And that was that. I made the decision I wasn't going to go back into a mainstream corporate role. I left C&W not long after that, and over the last 25 years nearly, I've started up or led a number of small and scale-up businesses.
So tell us a little bit about those businesses, and then obviously I want to jump in and really dig deeper into the OneGTM journey. But you left the corporate world, and obviously there will be people out there that are considering making that move. It sounds like you had a wonderful opportunity to almost taste what it was like, whilst knowing that you still had, however we do have security, you had somewhat security back then. But tell us, you decided to make that move. What happened straight away in terms of once you'd left C&W?
I went on a bit of a journey and I didn't necessarily have a clear plan. The first few years were trying different things. So I had a number of different businesses. I set up a marketing consultancy and ran that for a number of years. I had another business which I ended up doing alongside that, which is where we set up co-branded telephony schemes for football clubs.
Oh, interesting.
That was very interesting. I got to work with some big football clubs, which was a lot of fun as a keen football fan. I then spent a bit of time running a SaaS startup, not the one that I founded, but one that I came into in the fairly early stages and ran that. And so I did a number of different things. And I think to an extent, went through a process of working out what worked for me and what I really wanted to do. And a lot of those experiences ultimately led to setting up OneGTM, which is a bit over a decade ago now.
So let's unpack OneGTM. So we went through some learnings. What was it from those learnings that then prompted the founding of OneGTM, and what was the vision?
I think generally, and actually one of the reasons I went on this journey is as I worked out, as I was going through this process when I was in corporate life of working out what I did and didn't like, there was a few things that I concluded, and I did some exercises and spoke to a career coach and all that sort of thing, and worked out that what I really needed was, or wanted out to be happy in a role, was one, independence and freedom and the ability to set my own destiny. Two, an element of risk, which I wasn't going to find in, not that you don't have risk in corporate life, that risk that comes associated with setting up a business, I think, and trying to get it off the ground, and the ability to be creative, which was something which, again, I wanted. And that sort of led me to OneGTM, and I set up OneGTM in conjunction with a former colleague, Tim.
Yeah.
And it largely, setting up OneGTM was about me doing what I decided I really wanted to do. And to an extent, Tim doing what he decided he wanted to do. One of the things through both working in corporate life and then running or setting up a few different businesses, I realised what I really enjoyed was working on go-to-market strategy for tech. Okay. I love tech. I'm really interested in the tech environment. I get excited by the application of technology into the business environment. And I really enjoy the sort of, how do we take this particular product to market? How do we bring it to life for the end customers? What are the right channels to use? What sort of tactics? So what OneGTM largely was about, from a personal perspective, it was about me wanting to build a business around what I actually enjoy doing. And we identified it's a gap in the market that we perceived in the types of companies that were out there.
And just to touch a little bit on, to go a little bit backwards, you mentioned career coaching. Do you just explain a little bit about that for anyone who's listening? What did that sort of involve, and what did it uncover for you?
Yeah, and it ties in what I was saying before. I was at a point working in corporate life where I knew I wasn't happy. On one side, I was doing really well. On the other side, I just wasn't really enjoying it. And I couldn't really work out why. I felt, okay, I'm being successful. Why am I not really enjoying what I'm doing? So, I engaged a career coach. And what that helped me do, to an extent, it stripped it back to basics for me in terms of really thinking about situations where I was really motivated and excited, and that one of the exercises that they got me to do was come up with some times in my life when I'd been really excited and enthusiastic and engaged with whatever I was doing, and that might be in the personal sphere or it might be in a business sphere, and write down what were the words that came to mind about that particular situation that meant I was motivated. And as I say, that one of the things that came out from that was those three things I said before. I don't really like being answerable to other people, is what I've worked out after a period of time, which probably means I'm not a very good corporate employee. I like to be able to do what I want to do, fundamentally. That risk element and that creative element. And I got to those things. I thought, okay, now I understand why I'm not really, I've got this nice middle management job and I spend most of my time dealing with politics and organisational stuff. No wonder I'm not actually enjoying
Yeah.
myself.
Yeah.
So I found that a really helpful exercise to go through at that time. It just gave me greater clarity around going forward. What did I actually need to build my working life around, or what needed to be there that if I was going to be happy and motivated and fulfilled?
Yeah, it sounds like a really worthwhile exercise. So if we think about OneGTM, and obviously I'm going to ask a lot of questions around sort of the growth journey with OneGTM. Often when people read business books, it says you always need to have a clear plan. So ultimately you went on to sell OneGTM, and we'll touch on that later. But did you start with that in mind? We are going to build a business that ultimately we are going to sell.
No, we didn't. We didn't have a clear plan. And as I spend a lot of my time advising businesses on how to put a plan together, that's a bit ironic, probably. No, as I said, to an extent, it was putting together a business that we wanted to have, doing the things that we wanted to. It did, I think where we got it right is we had a very clear idea about the problem that we were trying to solve, which is the foundation of any successful business. I think we'd both spent time in corporate life, and we both then spent time running our own businesses. And I think one of the things that we both recognized was that in any large organization, there's often within their go-to-market activity a huge number of disconnects. So you get big disconnects between marketing and sales and the partner teams. You speak a different language, have different objectives. And you get big disconnects between strategy and execution. And partly that comes down to the types of the suppliers that were there. We've both been customers of consultancies, of marketing agencies. And I think one of the things that we both felt strongly was often you'd go out and engage a strategy consultancy to help you come up with your go-to-market strategy, but they couldn't then help you execute. They'd then give you a nice PowerPoint deck and say, off you go. And you then go and engage some creative marketing agencies to do the execution. And they perhaps didn't fully get the strategy. They were great at the creative stuff. So the whole idea behind OneGTM was to bring those two things together. So to bring the sort of best bits of a strategy consultancy with really strong delivery capabilities in terms of the marketing side of it, and be able to deliver a more joined up solution for our clients.
Yeah.
So that's a bit of a long answer to a simple question, which was, did you start off by planning to build a business sell? No, we didn't. But I think we had a very clear idea in mind about the type of business we wanted to build and why we were building it.
Yeah, coming back to that, solving a problem rather than having a great idea and then does it solve a problem? So in the early days, what was some of the first big wins or markers that confirmed that you were onto something when you set out on your OneGTM, you and your business partner?
It came down to client wins. So I think when we set up the business, to an extent, it was a bit of an experiment. We both had other things going on. And to be honest, we didn't fully put all of our irons in the OneGTM fire initially. So it was, okay, let's set this up. Let's see how it goes. Let's test the market. We got some good early wins. We got some partly through our own networks, partly through introductions, the likes of Semantic and AboveNet and Cable and Wireless, where I had existing contacts. I think what really convinced us that we were onto something and it was worth pursuing is that those clients were then coming back to us for multiple repeat projects. I think it wasn't just a case of we were winning a piece of work, great, thank you very much, and then we move on and try and find the next client. Pretty much every client, I think every single client we won in the first few years came back to us for some additional work. So that sort of said to us, okay, we've got something here. This sort of approach clearly is meeting a need within the clients that we're working with.
And so what about, so you were onto something, you were getting good market feedback. What was that trigger then for you and Tim to say, we are going to put our eggs in this basket? What was the driver behind that? Because clearly you did.
Yes, we did. We took a little bit of time before we both fully committed to it because, as I say, we were testing the market and we both had other things going on. But I think it came to a point where we just saw there was so much opportunity with OneGTM. As I say, it seems, it maybe sounds a bit complacent. We weren't necessarily having to work too hard to grow the business. We were doing the right things in terms of the type of work we were delivering. Clients were coming back to us. We were getting referrals to other businesses, that whole word of mouth thing, which is that's ideally what you want in the early stages. So it just became, I think we both got to a point where we thought we have the opportunity to create something significant here. Let's go for it. Let's scrap the other things we're doing or put them on the back burner. Let's really put all our effort into OneGTM. And that's what we did. And then we obviously carried on growing and accelerated from there.
So clearly customers were coming back, clients were coming back. Are there any sort of key ingredients that you would say that were in the mix of what you were delivering that was making them come back? So obviously you were solving a problem for them, but anything that you think would be transferable? What was it that you were doing that made these people come back? Without blowing your own trumpet too much.
Transferable is a good question. I think, I'm not sure if this is transferable, but I think, and it sounds a real statement of the obvious as I'm about to say it, but I think what we were good at, because we took this consulting-led approach, companies were perhaps used to dealing with agencies whereby you'd go an agency in and you'd give them a brief. But to get to that point, you really needed to know what it was you wanted the agency to do. I think the way that we worked was we didn't tend to work with briefs very much. It was a case of find someone with a problem, get in there, help them work out what it was that needed to happen, spend that time. So we had a very consultative approach to how we engaged with clients, helping them almost before they engaged us, helping them work out what it was that they needed to do. And I think it was that sort of consultative approach that customers felt worked for them. I think the other thing which we got feedback from clients quite a lot that they liked is we were prepared to challenge them. If we didn't think what they were asking us to do was the right thing to do, we challenged them. We challenged their assumptions. And I think, and I'm sure there are many other organizations that do that, but that's something that we got a lot of feedback was what they really liked about working with us was that we would challenge them. We would just not accept. Sometimes, as a few clients have said to me, you called out our BS and you didn't just accept it. So that was something that we got a lot of feedback. I think that approach of being very consultative and not taking things at face value and being quite challenging. So
and I think that builds trust and confidence to use you time and time again. The fact that you will counter and ask some quite challenging questions that require them to think more deeply. So what about some of the early challenges in that sort of, in the early-ish phases? You've been really clear about you didn't put all your eggs in one basket, so it wasn't all in. This was make or break. But what are some of the biggies that sort of stick out to you that sort of made you and Tim think, oof, either this is too hard or do we really want to do this, or anything that was tough?
I think at the very start, getting people to take a punt on you to an extent, when you've got no track record at all, then obviously that's a challenge. And to an extent, you're leveraging your personal brands at that point and you're inevitably your trusted relationships. But even so, with that, for any client choosing to bring in a company with no track record, with no case studies, that's still a leap of faith for a client. So I think we had to work hard to build trust with those initial clients that they would actually believe in us. I think they might have trusted us individually, but actually can you then take our whole requirement and deliver it as a program and bring in the right resources? So that definitely was a challenge. And I think the challenge for every single startup business, particularly when it's a services business, you haven't got a tangible product. Any client is taking a leap of faith to an extent when they engage you. So I think that was one. And then I think once beyond that, once you have got some traction and you start to grow, obviously it's then about, can you scale up so that you can do the same thing and deliver the same level of quality when it's not just a small core handful of people that are doing the work. Inevitably, when you're starting up a business like that, you tend, and I certainly was, you tend to be involved in everything.
Yes.
You're involved in every project to an extent. You're the face of the organisation, which is great for a while, but obviously it's not very scalable. So then the challenge becomes, okay, how do we replicate this? How do we build an organisation, a team that can deliver the same quality in the same way when the founders aren't in the picture at all?
Yeah. And that leads beautifully into my next question. You've got you and Tim, and then undoubtedly a few others. But how do you go, to your point, how do you go about scaling? What did you look at first? Was it process, people? What's your story on that side?
You mentioned the two words there, process and people, and I think they're both crucial. I think you need the right people, and you need to get the right sort of caliber of people in with the right characteristics and values and skills, etc. But also being able to give a process, having frameworks for them to work with it, particularly the type of business we were, consulting-led business. Even if you've got bright people, you don't want everyone you bring in to just be making it up from scratch every time that they take on a new project, because then you've got no consistency in terms of approach. So, we worked hard on one side at working out what type of people we wanted and how to find them. On the other side, putting in place some processes, some frameworks, so that there was at least a degree of consistency in what we did. But actually, I think probably there's a third element, and it's probably as important or more important, because I think processes and frameworks only get you so far, because we were always reluctant to be overly templated in the way that we do things, because then if you do that, you tend to stop listening to actually what the client's problem is. You think about, okay, this is what we do. I think the other thing which was actually key was to have the right ethos within the team about how you work, not just what you do, but how you work. So I think, that's probably the third element that was really, really key, I think it was instinctive, probably, rather than we actually sat down and planned it as a strategy. But I think that was a key element in terms of us actually enabling us to do it successfully.
Yeah, and sometimes it's difficult would you call that culture? Would you call that the way you behaved, the way you treated each other?
Definitely, that was a hugely important part of, I think, what we did. The right culture, the right values. I'm a big believer I'm quite sceptical about values that are written down.
Yes.
There's no harm in writing values down, but it's about what you live, how you behave, what sort of behaviours you model. That's the sort of thing that creates the culture. So yes, I think that was a big part of it as well.
Yeah. And sticking with hiring, in the early stages, I'm sure a lot of it is contacts of contacts. It's people you like, trust, or have done projects before. When you're growing beyond that, were there any particular either hiring challenges or hiring successes that, specifically knocked you back or allowed you to move forward more quickly?
I think generally, it took us a bit of time to work out the right sort of profile of person to bring in.
Yeah.
We didn't have any major disasters. We didn't have anybody that turned out to be a
monster,
complete nightmare. But I think what we were trying to do, because we wanted to operate in a different way, and we wanted to position ourselves differently from your typical marketing agency. Not to denigrate.
No, of course.
There are many great marketing agencies out there, but we wanted to do something slightly different to them. I think the obvious route initially for us was, go and recruit experienced people from marketing agencies.
Yeah.
But what we realised, actually, if we brought those type of people in, they had a particular way of thinking about the world and a particular approach, which to our view, was often quite narrow.
Yeah.
Very much what we wanted to encourage, and the whole ethos was being very holistic in the way that we think about go-to-market, in terms of how does sales integrate with marketing, in terms of what you're doing on the partner side, how do all the different elements. And I think what we found is people who had an agency background tended to maybe be a bit more blinkered in their thinking. The other alternative was to go and hire people from existing strategy consultancies, because we wanted that consulting led. But our conclusion was, one, they were flipping expensive, but also the ones that would probably be inclined to come and work for a very small startup that no one had ever heard of probably weren't going to be the creme de la creme.
Yeah.
So we took the decision relatively early that we would take the approach of growing our own talent.
Yeah.
Which was probably a slower approach. And I think, it probably wasn't the fastest way to grow the business. So what we did was focus on recruiting smart, enthusiastic, keen young people, typically straight out of university or maybe with a year or two's experience, that we could then develop and to an extent mould in terms of the OneGTM way of doing things, the OneGTM approach. And as I say, that at times that probably makes it harder work because it's more effort to bring people in and train people up from scratch. But I think it gave us in the long run, gave us sort of a stronger team and a stronger culture.
Yeah.
We did complement those people with some experienced people that typically come from client side. So we complemented the smart young people with some experienced old hands, but that had come from client side rather than an agency or consultancy background, that had knew what it was like to work in large organizations, that understood the industry. And and that proved quite an effective combination.
And so you worked with some very large clients. And obviously you came from the corporate background, but to your point, you were going to market with a new way of delivering a solution. Do you think, having come from that corporate world, you were able to navigate it more easily, or do you think it gave you some competitive advantage?
Yeah, I think it did. I think because we had worked in that environment, we understood, I suppose, the challenges of it. We very much could understand what it was like sitting on our clients' side of the desk. We always tried to do that. And one of the things that actually Tim, my co-founder, said is we wanted to be the type of company that we wished we'd had when we were clients. So I think, perhaps if you haven't worked in a large enterprise environment, it's perhaps easy to underestimate the complexity of working in those organizations, how many different moving parts there are to affect any meaningful change in that type of environment. How many things need to be aligned, so many different stakeholders with competing interests, at times conflicting interests. And one of the things that used to drive me mad about corporate life was sometimes it seemed like some people were far more focused on their internal competitors than they were on the external, external competitors. So I think having worked in that environment, partly it gave us the ability to empathise more with the clients that we were selling to, but also in terms of how we were positioning what we did, we could relate it to the challenges that we knew that they faced. I think if you're selling into a large enterprise, whatever your product or service is, it's not going to be working in isolation. It's going to be a part of a much bigger solution within that environment. So the ability to be able to understand and communicate how what we did would fit in with everything else that was going on within their organization, and show that we understood the challenges that would come with getting the sales team to adopt whatever the approach was, or getting finance to buy into it, or whatever it was. So I think I think it helped us when selling in to those clients, but I also think it helped us do a better job, because to an extent it's easy to sell a dream sometimes. Actually turning that into something that delivers results is a lot more challenging.
Yeah, I love that that piece about being the service provider or the solution provider that you wish you'd have had when you were on the other side of the table. That's very much sort of the philosophy that I've always wanted to adopt. Because if you can do that, you're putting yourself right in the shoes of the customer, which is exactly what you're talking about, really having that empathy for those individuals and groups that you've been working with, which then you're talking the same language, you're building the trust, hence why, of course, you need to deliver or over-deliver, and then they ask you to come back.
Yeah.
So, which ultimately was the driving force behind the success that you were building at OneGTM. At any point, you could clearly see that, that there's more than enough appetite for what you're doing. You're getting repeat business. Clearly an opportunity to keep going. Some would start to say, oh, this is an opportunity we need to capitalise on. Should we consider getting some external investment? At any point, did you consider going down that road?
We didn't. I'm not saying we didn't consider it, but we decided not to. And I think that there were probably a number of reasons why we didn't. I think one is I had some experience working in a company that had VC funding and didn't particularly enjoy the experience, and that was partly because the business was struggling, but actually having external investors to be answerable to, going back to what I mentioned earlier, I didn't particularly want that. Coming back to being in control of your own destiny and being able to follow your own path. I think to an extent the nature of the business we had very good margins. It was immediately profitable. It was immediately generative. We were able to bootstrap our growth relatively easily, and that times that might have meant initially obviously not taking out as much
of course
business. We were using the profit to fund the expansion, but I don't think we ever felt the need to go out and get more finance. I think another factor was, and this may be something some people would criticize, is I don't think we were focused on building the biggest business we could or making the most money that we could. I think for us, it was always about building a business that we were proud of in terms of the type of work that it delivered. And I think we were always conscious about not trying to grow too quickly, because then we wouldn't be able to retain the quality.
Yeah,
which I think
interesting.
it's a very difficult thing to do for a services business to grow very quickly, to take on lots of new people, and still maintain the same level of quality. And not to say some people haven't done it, and hats off to them, but I think we were always very wary about growing at a rate that we could still ensure we were delivering at the sorts of the quality of work that we prided ourselves on.
And I think that is really interesting in itself. The fact that there's a few things that you've spoken about that instantly make me tune into you. I'm not saying everything was conscious and considered, but very much it sounds to me like making some key decisions like that about focusing on quality, not necessarily focusing on having a huge business because of the kind of work that you wanted to deliver. Again, that then feeds into culturally how you behave, how you speak, how you articulate to people who join the team, which makes it very solid as a business.
Hopefully, yeah, I think that was our experience. I'm not saying we didn't have challenges, and I'm not saying everything was perfect at all times. But I do, when I look back at the whole time that we had OneGTM, one of the things I'm particularly proud of is I think we had great relationships with a lot of customers. We had very large clients that we had long-standing relationships with that remained clients for 6, 7, 8 years. Kept coming backwards. And we wouldn't have been able to achieve that if we weren't doing something right. And I think if we hadn't been able to grow that team that was delivering that sort of consistent quality of service.
And you touched there at the beginning, you just said, that isn't to say that there weren't any challenges along the way. So let's unpack a couple of those. What sticks in your mind about some of the bigger challenges that you had to face, and how did you overcome those?
I think there were Lots of small ones along the way, I'd say, rather than I can't, looking back, and it may be just that I've blurred out in my memory any horrendous episodes. I think it was probably lots of small challenges or small mistakes that we then learnt from quickly. Inevitably, although I think we did overall, our approach to recruitment and building the team worked really well.
Yeah.
Not everything did. We didn't always. We learned over time what training was needed.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that's perhaps difficult and we probably struggle from is because we both grown up in that corporate environment and we both had quite a lot of experience across the different areas, marketing, sales, partnerships, etc. We probably took for granted a lot of stuff which we shouldn't have taken for granted. We took for granted that people would just instinctively know certain stuff.
Yeah.
So I think, and particularly when we were starting to bring in people that weren't experienced and aim to develop them, it took us a while to probably understand the level of training and development and the areas that they were likely to fall down just because of not gaps in terms of their attitude or basic intelligence, but actually just because if you've never been through this, you just won't know.
Of course, yeah.
The typical pitfalls. Yeah, so I would say it was a sort of we just continually were refining our approach as we went along. But I think that was getting the recruitment and the development right alongside having the sort of the right culture and the processes and all the other stuff. I think ultimately that was what the successful failure of the business depended on.
So moving on to ultimately, you went on to sell it. And we started with the question, was that always the plan? And at the beginning, it sounds like it wasn't. So what happened in that part of the journey? What was that experience like?
The idea of selling, I think, the further we went along, more we grew, we got to a point where we realized, actually, we have got something here that's potentially saleable.
Yeah.
I think a small services business, I think it's quite difficult when a business effectively revolves around one or two or a handful of people.
Yeah.
That's quite a difficult thing to sell because for a buyer,
it's just you.
Actually, all you're buying is a bunch of people that are probably going to leave as soon as you bought the business. So I think, you've got to get to a certain critical mass and a certain size in terms of team, in terms of having the right frameworks and processes and standardized way of doing things. And I think we got to a point probably about five or 6 years ago that we thought, actually, I think we've got something here that potentially could be saleable. So at that point, we didn't have any active plan around it, but we started speaking to a few people to understand if we did want to go down that route, what would it take? And started, I think, probably for a couple of years, just thinking about what are we going to need to do to make sure that if we do want to sell the business, that we're in a good state to do it.
Yeah. The
actual trigger was I had some health issues, which meant it just felt right to sell it now. We probably would have gone on another couple of years, 2 or 3 years maybe, but because I had some health issues, it just probably brought forward by a couple of years the time that we decided to sell. And once we did decide to sell, we went out, found some advisors that had experience in the sector. They helped us put together the pack that we needed to market, and we went out and marketed the business, obviously anonymously. We got a number of offers. We were quite pleasantly surprised about the fact that we got quite a few different offers for the business, and ultimately we chose one of them. Not actually the biggest in terms of absolute value, but the one that we felt was the best fit for the organisation and worked for us in terms of timeframes. And that's when the fun really started in terms of the due diligence process. And
so a little bit more detail around that. So obviously you get advisors and they start to talk about what you need to get a decent valuation for the business. Where did they suggest that you focused, or were you all round in good shape already? Where are the areas for anyone listening that is really thinking about at some point they're going to go for an exit? And obviously it will vary. I know you're a service business and you can only obviously talk about it, I guess, from your experience. But What was the advice?
We definitely had work to do. So we thought we were in pretty good shape, and we probably weren't in too bad shape, but there was definitely work to do. I'd say the advice for anyone else preparing for that is make sure your information systems are good in terms of, particularly around all of the metrics within the business, both financial metrics and performance metrics, customer satisfaction metrics. Make sure you've got really good frameworks in place for doing that, and that you're tracking that over a period of time, because any potential buyer coming in is not just going to want to know, okay, what have you done in the last 6 months?
Yeah.
They're going to want to see the trend going back. And we had to do some work to effectively go back and unpack a lot of the data that we had so that we could actually present the right sort of pack, a solid information pack for any potential buyer. I think there's a distinction. We'd been monitoring the stuff that we thought we needed to run the business. What we hadn't necessarily been doing was capturing and tracking the stuff that a potential buyer would want to know. And so there was work to, because we'd been building up to it for a couple of years, we'd started doing some of the right things, and we'd got our accounts and our management reporting packs and all of that. We'd got that in much better shape than it had been previously. We didn't really have a management reporting pack probably before that. But once we actually seriously got into the sale process, there was just another level of detail that we needed to produce. And our advisors were great in terms of asking us the questions that they knew a potential buyer would want to ask, and helping us put all together that information. Yeah, and all the stuff. Are you measuring gross margin in the right way? Any buyers going to want to really understand what's driving gross margin, what are all the factors in there. Because I work with different businesses now, and sometimes businesses have all sorts of stuff in their gross margin number that shouldn't be in there, or stuff that isn't in there that should be in there. And that makes it really difficult for a potential buyer to think, actually, okay, if we scale this business, if we put another X amount of investment into this and we scale this up, actually what's the profitability? So if you can't really accurately track your gross margin. So there were things like that you really need to get your house in order. Having been through it myself, I would say probably at least 3 years before you're likely to be entering the sale process. Really make sure that you're putting the right foundations in place in terms of how you're capturing information, how you're tracking. The other thing was just about codifying what we did.
Yes.
As I mentioned, as we were growing the business anyway, we were developing frameworks and processes. But as we were thinking about selling it, and really what we needed to support continued growth, we got a lot tighter then in terms of the processes, in terms of the systems that we were using to manage the business. We put in a new project management system, for example, so that we could scale that side of it. Yeah, I think, sorry, that I felt like I've rambled on a little bit.
Really useful, really helpful.
But I think it's making sure, one is making sure you can present a really clear, unambiguous historical view of what's been happening within the business. And that there's no ambiguities in the number, and you've got the data to back up the story you want to tell about where the business has come from. And the other thing is that you can present a picture that says, and we're all set up to carry on. You could double the size of this business. So we've got the processes, the systems, the recruitment model, the training, we've got all of that in place. That actually, if you chucked a whole bunch of additional money at this and you doubled the size of the business in the next 3 years, it's all there. The foundation is there for growth. Yeah.
No, that was really clear, actually. You thought you rambled. You certainly didn't. So to turn in a little bit more onto you now as a leader, the co-founder, when you look back on your personal journey, how do you feel your style or the way that you lead evolved if you look back at the Phil at the beginning and then through that journey? And any lessons that or observations that you would share with somebody who was going on a similar journey?
Yeah, I think I'm sure it's the case with most businesses, it certainly was with us, and partly because of the nature of business we were, is in the early years, effectively, me and Tim and a few other people were the product.
Yeah.
I was doing most of the selling and delivering a lot of the work. So my role was to be the business, and Tim also with his part of it. So my focus early on was just around winning clients and then working with a small team to deliver work. But over the first few years, I was probably involved in everything that we were doing, or at least had visibility of it. And I knew every project and I knew every client conversation. And that was fun. I enjoyed that. But obviously that gets to a point where you want to move on from that. And that's obviously not a scalable model. So then the role very much changed to how can I bring in other people and equip for all the stuff we've talked about. How do I build a team, an environment, a culture, which is going to enable us to do the same sort of thing, but do it 50 times larger than I could do on my own. And obviously that then requires different skills from me personally. It's far more around leading the team, setting the direction, providing the best practice, the indications of training, trying to create the right environment that people feel motivated, because very much there's only so much we can do by giving people the process and the information. Ultimately, they've got to be motivated to want to do the best work and to want to deliver great results for the client. So I think over the time that was leading the company, obviously the focus switches from, I think from a personal journey, what's interesting is I think, and inevitably early on, it's very much just about you, or you and a few others, and quite ego driven. I don't think I'm necessarily particularly egotistical, but to an extent, if a client gives you great feedback, you're getting feedback about you, and it's great, I've done a great job. What I found I loved was that actually, and I do remember actually the first time we got great client feedback on a project we delivered, that I'd had absolutely no involvement in at all, no visibility. I hadn't been involved in any conversations. I hadn't seen any of the work that was going out. Yeah. And I remember getting a massive buzz from that about the fact of, hey, we've really built something here that actually we've created. We've got these people that we've brought in. We've created the right environment that actually this is happening, and I'm not directing it. I'm not involved at all. And I think over time, that side of it probably gave me more satisfaction and enjoyment than when I was going out and delivering it myself.
That's really interesting, because obviously some people find that part challenging, that sort of letting go and not being focused on delivery as much. So that's quite interesting.
I have to say, letting go is still a failing of mine. But so I did have to because you have to let go. Physically you can't, but I think it was something I probably tried for times to keep too much control. And it was a bit of a mindset shift at a certain point to recognise I can't be involved in everything. Yeah. I can't have visibility of every piece of work that goes out. It's just impossible. And actually I've got to trust people, because actually we've got some really great, smart people here, and they don't need me peering over their shoulder for everything they do. But there was an adjustment process to get to that point.
Yeah. Oh, and what about sort of support systems for you? Obviously you were co-founder, that hopefully helps, but mentors, did you have a board throughout the journey? What was your support system like? Who could you lean on?
Didn't have a mentor. One of the things that I think probably is a personal weakness of mine is I'm not very good at reaching out and asking for help. Yeah. And again, which is something similar. It's a bit ironic given that I now work as an advisor to boards. I was rubbish at actually reaching out externally for help. Having a co-founder definitely helped. I think, although Tim and I are quite different people and have different attitudes, but we could debate things between us. If we had an issue, we could discuss it. So I think definitely having the co-founder helped. And over time, just getting some really good people around. So we had some really good hires. We brought in some people that became part of the management team. Yeah. And that were able to share the load, and we could then work collaboratively, and we could bounce ideas off each other. So I think, yes, getting good people around around us as the co-founders was again really important. It was almost like steps we went through with the business, and I think getting to that point where we had a proper management team as opposed to just me and Tim was an important part of the growth journey that we went on.
And what about things like books that you might have read along the way that you'd really say that this made a difference to me, either on a personal side and coping with leading and running a business, or from a business perspective, business book that you might have read, or a process that you found really helpful?
I think in terms of books, I mean, it actually probably predates OneGTM, but I went through a period, and it probably is around the period when I was thinking, I'm not sure I want to do corporate life anymore. But as I mentioned at the beginning, I started off in sales, and I did a number of different sales roles, and I probably at that point had a very narrow view about what a business consists of. It was basically sales and lots of other people that should be supporting sales, and that was probably my view of what a business consists of. But as I got more, spent longer, I got more interested in the other aspects of business, and particularly marketing. So I probably went through a few years of reading a whole bunch of different books, classic books in terms of Geoffrey Moore and Porter and people like that, just absorb it. I was always really interested in strategy. So I read lots of the sort of conventional textbooks around marketing strategy and business strategy and things like that, and avidly reading Harvard Business Review and The Economist and McKinsey Quarterly and whatever it was. And I think I ingested a lot of this stuff that actually, by the time I got into OneGTM, I probably actually turned a little more inwards. And actually, it was all of this stuff that I'd learned and all this stuff that I acquired along the way then turned into, it all fed into my thinking around what OneGTM is and should be. So while we were actually growing OneGTM, I'm not sure I read too many business books. I think I almost then if I wasn't doing OneGTM, I probably just wanted to read a novel or something.
Switch off. So we're almost getting to the end. So I've just got a couple more questions, and this is like lessons to share with people that are listening. So is there a myth that you would like to bust when it comes to growing / scaling a business?
I'm not sure this is whether it's a myth. I think one of the things, because as I say, I work with a lot of businesses. So I've worked with a lot of large enterprises as an advisor to large enterprises, and I now work with smaller sort of scale ups. I think a common failing I see is trying to chase too many different opportunities. And I think particularly as a small growing business, I think there's this temptation to think the more opportunities we go after, then the faster we'll grow. And often the inverse is true. It is true. I think with limited resources, with no market presence, one of the key things I think for an early stage business starting to scale up is real clear focus. Not just all the customers that potentially you could sell to, but who are the ones who have that real critical, pressing pain point that are likely to buy from you in short order. And I think the most, probably, and then what's your really compelling proposition to them? Do you have a real clear understanding about what that problem is that you're solving, how you're going to create value for them, and then put all of your effort into positioning yourself and communicating your proposition to those customers that are not just your potential target market, but that primary target market, the ones who are most likely to buy from you. Because I think so many early stage businesses waste a lot of energy and effort just chasing after lots of different opportunities. Oh, there's a new opportunity over there, let's go after that. And it's really difficult it's even difficult for large businesses, but particularly for small businesses with finite resources.
Yeah,
so
sadly, I've seen it a few times. There's just all this opportunity, and I think that the inability to choose and prioritise those opportunities, sadly, can see businesses fail.
Yeah, unfortunately they can. I think get that focus, be really laser focused over the first few years. Use that to establish your foothold, use that to establish your presence in the market, to build those case studies that you can then use to go and win other types of organisations. But it's a bit of a sort of hackneyed cliche, but having 10 clients in one sector is probably you've got a more solid, sustainable business than actually having 10 different clients in 10 different sectors where you're not really a significant player in any of them.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's a myth that's busted, but I think it's something that I see commonly with smaller and growing businesses.
Yeah, and you answered my last question in there as well. And that was really, I will ask it, but I think you've just answered it. And that was, if you were going to give one piece of advice to someone looking to scale right now, what would that one piece of advice be?
Yeah, definitely that focus, that real clarity over strategy. We've talked about it. I think a lot of businesses get to a point where they've got something good in terms of a product or a piece of tech or a service, and then they're just searching around for a problem to apply it to. And the end result is your messaging becomes fuzzy, your resources are too thinly spread, you haven't got that. It takes a concerted effort to actually build a customer base when you're an early stage company. I think another thing I was going to say, just in terms of advice to a founder, and this sort of maybe goes back to more of the personal stuff that you were asking about earlier, I think is about being true to yourself and being yourself and understanding what it is. Why are you actually doing this? Is it to make the most money? Is it to build the biggest possible business?
Yeah.
Is it because because actually it's something you enjoy and you want to, and then working out what role do you want it to bound? One of the things that I see sometimes is I think we've got all this image about the successful founder, the successful entrepreneur as some sort of ego-driven superhero, battering down every door through the force of their personality, charisma, and working 100-hour weeks and driving their teams to exhaustion. And I think sometimes founders almost feel like that's the role that they have to play.
Yeah.
And it might be successful, but it probably doesn't lead to necessarily a particularly healthy or sustainable or fulfilling model. So I think, one of the things I'd always say is do it your way.
Yeah.
Do it in the way that works for you. Be who you are. Be authentic, and not trying to be some image of what you think a founder should look like.
And I think that is a fantastic place to close, because I think for me, what that speaks to is very much about making conscious decisions as best you can, rather than being swept away with what society tells you success looks like. So I think that is a massively insightful piece from you at the end of the conversation, which I have thoroughly enjoyed. I hope you've enjoyed it.
It's been good. I haven't prattled on too much, but
no, I think there is lots and lots. Unsurprisingly, that's why I wanted you to come on to the podcast to share your journey in a very sort of clear, articulate way. It's really clear why OneGTM was successful. And we've touched on that throughout the conversation. So as you've touched on in here, you're now advising other people who are embarking on their growth journey. And if people want to get in touch with you at the end of the podcast, they'll see your details and so can reach out to you and have a conversation to see if there's any advice that you can offer them. It's a big thank you from me. I really appreciate you taking the time to be on the podcast.
That's a pleasure. Thanks for asking me. Enjoyed it.
Thanks very much. So that's it for this episode of Scaling Stories Unfiltered. If you enjoyed the conversation, don't forget to hit the subscribe and share it with someone who's on their own scaling journey. And I'd love to hear from you, whether you've got a question, a personal story to share, or even want to suggest someone I might interview. The link is in the description below. Your insights could be featured in a future episode. In the meantime, why not check out some of our other interviews for some more real stories, unfiltered and true, about scaling a business. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you in the next one.